Hi guys, this is your first online lecture for human anatomy. Welcome. Um, I want to, in this lecture, start the material, and I also want to show you how I'm going to be doing the online lectures and how they're similar and different from the in-person lectures. Okay, so first, let me introduce you to what you'll be responsible for and what your notes look like. So you can see here that your notes are going to be available to you for free in Google Doc form. I will have several places that you can access these. Definitely you'll always be able to access them on Canvas. A strength of Google Docs is that you can save them to your own Google Drive and then you can take notes in them or edit them. You can't edit my notes, but you can edit yours, so you can download them. You can also collaborate with them. So if you find a study partner that you really like studying with, you can collaborate on Google Docs. You can put in links to your own animations or videos. You can link my videos in here so that they're all in one place if you want to. So the way that I will lecture both in person and online is to use these notes as a guide for both what I need to cover to make sure I remember to cover it, and also as a guide for what you need to know. So your anatomy textbook is huge. They all are. What do you have to know out of that? You use your notes as a guide to what to study, because I can't teach you all of human anatomy in a single semester. I don't even know all of human anatomy, and no one does. So what do you use? You use your notes to focus in on what you're supposed to know. So the way that I will do this and the in-person lecture is I will project these notes. You're not supposed to really be reading the notes. It's just for us to follow along. And then there will be images from the textbook that I will show you guys, and I can annotate on these images, for instance. Sometimes there will be animations that are hyperlinked in the notes. So I often get the question, why are these figures not already in the notes? So this is figure 1.7 right here that I'm going to be referring to. Why isn't that figure in the notes? Well, because I didn't make the figure and I don't own it. So how would you get access to it? Well, the textbook is required for this course. Don't try to get through human anatomy without a textbook, because I will use textbook images for quizzing. In addition, you really sometimes need to look at the specific image that I'm using so that you can make sure that you're actually getting the labeling correct. So you can either buy a physical textbook, or if you buy the online access to the textbook, to the digital textbook, then you get all of these figures and you can put them in your notes yourself. So you can actually put figure 1.7 in there. Figure 1.7 is not super important, but later on, for instance, when we're looking at the names of all of the muscles of the forearm, which are really difficult for most people, you may want to copy them into your notes, maybe even take the labels off, which you can also do in Google Docs, and then practice it that way. Or for something that's really specific and detailed that I use in lecture, you may want to put them in your notes. So anyway, those are up to you. You can do what you want with them. But typically speaking, when I quiz and test, you are going to find references to everything that I quiz and test on in your notes. Either the word is there, or I have an assignment to read that part of the textbook. So it really clarifies what you're responsible for. Okay, so let's go ahead and start on the first bit of material. This isn't going to be a very long lecture. I'm going to try to keep most of them short-ish, meaning they won't last an hour and 20 minutes like we would in class. They'll be shorter than that. And usually a few quiz questions after each one. So we'll work on that. I'll show you how we're going to do it a little bit later. Okay, so with this is starting on chapter 1, which is just the basic introduction to human anatomy. So there are really, I think, two big impediments to people getting comfortable with human anatomy. First, just the sheer mass of information that you're responsible for. And there's really not much that can be done about that except for me to be really clear about which parts I'm going to actually assess you on. The other part is that anatomy is in what is a foreign language for the vast majority of us. So most anatomical terminology is in ancient Greek and Latin, and I don't think any of us speak ancient Greek, and most of us didn't take Latin in school. Some of you guys did, and kudos to you. So what we have to do is get over the hump of the terminology that we're unfamiliar with. And so let's get over that hurdle by me linking right here in the first part of the first set of notes a subset of the Latin and Greek prefixes, suffixes, and combining forms that are commonly used to form anatomical and physiological terminology. So if you click on this and pull it up, these are just some useful prefixes, roots, and suffixes. It's not meant to be comprehensive by any stretch of the imagination, but it will get you started, and then we'll learn more as we go throughout the semester. So what am I going to do with this list? What I'm going to do is not ask you what angio means, but throw in one of your first quizzes some unfamiliar terms at you that are made of roots that you've studied. So if, for instance, I ask you what a hematocytoblast is, and you have no idea, but you know that hemato means blood, and of course you've known that cyto means cell, and that blast means bud or precursor, then you might be able to figure out in context that a hematocytoblast is a blood cell precursor, meaning the cells that make blood cells, and you find those in the red bone marrow. So I will throw unfamiliar terms made of familiar roots and ask you to see if you can figure out what the terms might mean. Okay, so that'll be in one of your first quizzes. So you're going to start to get comfortable with the terminology of anatomy in this whole first set of notes, and that's only part of it. The next part of it is to just have me give you an introduction to how we approach anatomy. There are a bunch of different ways to do it, and as far as the terminology, anatomy implies that we're cutting things, and if we are in lab, we often do cut things. You guys don't do cutting of human tissue. We do that for you just because it requires a level of skill that you haven't really gotten yet. But not all anatomy is at the gross or macro level. Anatomy is basically the study of structure, right? And this is human anatomy, so this is the study of the structure of the human body. And it actually sometimes is also referred to as morphology, morpho meaning shape or form. And it starts out with microscopic anatomy. 1610 was mostly cytology, which is just the study of the structure of cells and the function of cells. And we're not going to do that again in this class. We do, of course, refer to cells. So, you know, that hematocytoblast was a cell, but we don't study a lot of the structure of cells in here. What follows, slightly bigger but still microscopic, is histology, and histo is tissues. So histology is the study of tissues. Right after this set of notes, we will go into a histology section in which you look at photos of microscopic images of tissues. And then after that, you get big enough usually to see with the naked eye. So whereas you can't necessarily see, well, you can't see cardiac muscle with the naked eye, you can certainly see a heart with the naked eye. So when you get up to microscopic anatomy, you are usually at the organ level, not at the tissue level, and you can see things with the naked eye. So gross anatomy quite often involves dissection. If we are in lab in person, we do dissection of a few things. We generally dissect bone so that you can see the periosteum and the endosteum, the marrow. A lot of times we will dissect a cow eye. We dissect a fresh pig heart and usually a sheep brain. And then we have done the human tissue dissection for you. So there are two big ways to approach anatomy, and they're both really useful. It's called regional anatomy. And regional anatomy is that, okay, I'm a hand surgeon. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to, when I learn the anatomy of the forelimb, of the upper limb, what I'm going to learn is where the bones are, the muscles are, the nerves are, the blood vessels are, all with reference to one another. So I basically study this entire region all at one time. And that's really, really good for learning the relative locations of things within a certain region. And that is how anatomy is generally taught in medical school, for instance. How we teach anatomy and how it's mostly taught at the undergraduate level is different. It's systemic anatomy. So instead of focusing on a single region, I will learn the skeletal system anatomy all at once. Okay. And then I will layer on top of that muscular system anatomy because it generally attaches to the skeleton. Then I'll layer on top of that the nervous system anatomy because it innervates the muscles. And so with systemic anatomy, what you get is you get a big picture understanding of not only the trees, the individual parts, but also the forest, what it has to do with other body systems. And that's how we approach anatomy and how it's usually done at the undergrad level. There are other branches of anatomy as well, and sometimes we'll touch on those. There is surface anatomy, which a lot of times people use in healthcare. So for instance, where the stethoscope goes when your doctor is trying to listen to your heart from an anterior view, from an anterior approach, is generally close to between ribs 4 and 5, because that's when the heart comes into contact with the anterior thoracic wall. If you were trying to do an epidural injection and you wanted to make very, very certain that you didn't hit the spinal cord, if you made a mistake and went too deep, then you go below, you count the vertebra down, and your spinal cord ends about L2. So you're going to make sure, lumbar vertebra number 2, you're going to make sure you're well below that. The anterior superior iliac spines, if you kind of draw a line from one of those to the other, your urinary bladder is below. So there's lots of like surface anatomy. There's also developmental anatomy and embryology. Embryology is starting out from an embryo. How do you actually develop? And it's got a lot to do with developmental anatomy as well. And then there's pathological anatomy, which is what if something has an abnormal anatomy that impacts functionality, like scoliosis is a pathological anatomy, or a cleft palate is pathological anatomy. So most pathologies are actually physiological and not anatomical, but there are a few that are anatomical. And then if we do a good job with anatomy, what happens is your anatomical understanding leads to the physiological questions. And so the way that I teach anatomy, both to make it stick, which is really important because memorization has a little bit of a hard time sticking if it's not related to anything that you already know. So I teach phys, a little bit of phys, just a teeny bit of phys with anatomy. For instance, I don't just teach you the chambers of the heart and the names of the valves. I also teach you what they have to do with the physiological function of blood flow, right? So just a little phys to go with it. So what I would like, since I teach both anatomy and physiology, is for you guys to hold on to the really important parts of anatomy that will help you understand physiology. So I teach it with that in mind.